Good morning, everybody. I'm extremely pleased to be able to take part in this event, albeit virtually rather than physically. But I am delighted to be here. Thank you, Karen, for inviting me, and hello to all my colleagues at the Green Knowledge Economy Centre in Bournemouth University. I was asked by Karen to address three big questions and to put on an economist's hat. The three questions she asked me to address were: what did I think the big challenges facing business today were? Secondly, do I think sustainable businesses and sustainable development are compatible ideas? Do these things fit together naturally? Or is there a tension between these two things? And then the third thing she asked me to talk about was the knowledge economy. What is the green knowledge economy about, and how can businesses become more engaged in it? Since I've only got 5 minutes, I'm going to dive straight in and hope for the best, really. So if I take the first question about big challenges facing businesses, obviously, depending on what type of business you are, you'll see the challenge is very different. There's a big difference between an IBM, a global corporation, and Mr. Patel, who runs a corner shop, and so on. I mean, businesses are very diverse, very different, and so they'll see things very differently. But I think there are three challenges which all businesses face. In some way or another, they're going to be affected by it. The first one, I think, is a period which we have now entered, which is an unprecedented period, which is a kind of prolonged period of heightened economic uncertainty, where it's becoming increasingly difficult for businesses to take the long view. The big challenges there seem to be about managing risk and retaining talent, and by risk I mean risk with innovation, or risk with breaking into new markets. But essentially, I think businesses like uncertainty. In fact, if there was no uncertainty, there'd be no risk, there'd be no profit. But prolonged periods of uncertainty, I think, are a very big challenge and are not necessarily a good thing for businesses. The second thing, I think, is globalization. I was talking to a tennis partner of mine who's a Chinese economy specialist. And one of the things he was saying to me was that having spent 30 years in China and having looked at the economy there in great detail, is that we may, I think, have overestimated the degree to which the Chinese give as much as they take. In fact, what he described, rather like China and India together, it tends to be a bit of a one-way street. So while we are doing trade with China, we're doing trade with India, and these two countries are beginning to buy up British businesses, the real issue really is it a one-way street or a two-way street? Currently, it appears to be a one-way street. This raises very big issues about the future of globalization and how it's going to affect every business in this country, not only from the perspective of competition, but also from the perspective of trading overseas. And I think the latest statistics I saw from the government were that, in fact, we have a lot of new trading partners springing up everywhere in the most unexpected places that we didn't actually imagine were developing at the rate they were, particularly in parts of Africa and South America. So that's the other challenging, actually understanding the global economy in a different way. I think thirdly, and I think very importantly given what's coming next week, which are the big announcements on public spending cuts, is that there are also issues here about the role of the state. Businesses like to know where they stand and where government stands. But we are actually entering a very, very difficult period of public spending cuts. Or are we really looking at privatisation? Are we looking at both? But it's not clear whether spending cuts necessarily add up to the privatisation per se. No matter what happens, every business is going to be affected by this. You can run, but you can't hide. And it seems to me your hit will be, the business will be affected directly and indirectly. And rather like a pinball machine as opposed to a domino game, most of these results will become very difficult to predict for an individual business. Let me take the second question now, sustainable businesses and sustainable development. I think both these ideas, both these notions are about taking the long view. It's perhaps sustainable capitalism could be thought of as a unifying concept. It's something that Al Gore has championed and Jonathan Porritt has written a book about. I wonder whether everybody would agree that sustainability and capitalism actually fit together as natural bedfellows. It's an argument I think we could have forever. But essentially both are about taking the long view. I think family businesses, from my experience of talking to companies up and down the country, do take the long view. They're also locally rooted in the sense that the staff and the owner-managers tend to be local. So there's a tendency to weather out storms rather than close businesses, rather than lay people off. And I think their principles are most closest to what I would call a sustainable business. Global corporations, on the other hand, are responsive to shareholder value, and they're not locally rooted by definition. Sustainability crops up within corporate social responsibility or marketing type activities within these big businesses. It depends on the sector, and it depends on the distance from consumers. So it's no accident that Tesco, Marks and Spencer's tend to be the models of a modern sustainable business as far as that can be defined in those terms. And now finally to the green knowledge economy. This is a term that I coined I guess 2 years ago. It's kind of it's sort of on the one hand it sounds very simple, and every time I talk to a business and say green knowledge economy, yes, that sounds good, that's about right, I think that fits. But it probably requires a little bit of explaining because it is slightly unfamiliar. I think you've got to cast our minds back to the last 50 years, and for 50 years at least we have been living in a knowledge economy in this country. Wealth and social status depends ultimately on human capital, investments in human capital, that's what you know, and it also depends on who you know, that's social capital. So it's an economy really that's been built around knowledge and intangibles. Things like management, know-how, research and development skills and so on, and less so on the making of things. A lot of what we call manufacturing and making of things, production, had basically gone overseas from around about 1979 onwards, and it's continued to go overseas. The knowledge economy, what I'm calling the green knowledge economy, in a sense is a back to the future model. It's saying that if we want to tackle climate change, if we want to improve the way we handle resources, if we want to conserve our ecological systems and biodiversity, then we're going to have to invest in the physical side of the economy more. In other words, we have to go back and replace all those Victorian sewers and water and waste systems. We've got to get our roads sorted out because we can't go on forever with more and more cars on the road. And more pressure in terms of emissions, carbon emissions and so on. Manufacturing, we need engineering to build wind turbines, to build solar panels. We need agriculture because if we're going to be sustainable, then we need to source more things locally. So to some extent it's about areas of the economy which in a sense we've forgotten about and which need to be dusted up and brought back. All that we can hope is that we can recreate a lot of that productive base, because hopefully it's not too late. But there is potential for doing it. So it's much more physical, and that's why I sometimes joke and say that it's that Olivia Newton-John song for those people who are about as old as I am. If you go back about 30 years, there was a song by Olivia Newton-John, an Australian pop star called Let's Get Physical. So I think what we've got here is an economy, a knowledge economy that's altogether more physical and less virtual. More local, less global. But that in many ways is the ideal. And the green knowledge economy that I refer to really is about a transition between the knowledge economy we live in today and the knowledge economy we want to create for the future. And it'll only happen if and only if the green agenda is strong enough and backed up by the likes of you and me, government, consumers, businesses, to bring about the kinds of structural and spatial, geographical adjustments that its supporters really envisage. So for example, if we were moving towards that kind of greener future, that green knowledge economy future, then essentially we would see in Britain a different landscape. We would see networks, decentralized networks of resilient local economies that can stand by themselves, whether it's within regions or so on. But these economies, though, don't exist at present. If we look at the latest BBC report on what the geography of the green economy looks like in Britain, we will discover that most of the North and most of the Midlands, we've got local economies that hang on a thread and depend on the public sector. So we don't have that green economy landscape. What that actually is a very good measure of as well, is the distance we need to travel to get to the kind of future that some of us aspire to. So I'd leave you with a more simple question than that, since it depends on me and you at the end of the day, is what kind of future we want to create, is how green do you think you and your friends are? That's a good question. How green do you think Britain is? And once you've answered those questions, what you know is the distance to this ideal world of sustainable business and sustainable development. I hope things go well. I hope there's lots of questions and a lively debate this morning, and hopefully the next time I see you I'll be able to see you in person. Good morning.